The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer today. Well, good and most gracious God, we come before you here this morning just to give you all thanks and praise. And Lord, throughout this study of Acts, you've opened our eyes to how it is that you grow your church, how it is your church functions. And Lord, you've also opened our eyes to the impact that Christians can have in this world, both positive and negative. So Lord, as we continue our study here of Acts, we just pray that you would pour out your blessing upon us to not just enlighten our minds, but enlighten our hearts to the love that you have for your people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I guess my mind is not in a fog like it was last week. Because I'm looking at the session number and I'm looking at the chapter we're on, and I kept getting them confused. So we're on chapter 25. Okay, chapter 25. And I was kind of talking a little bit about this last week, that here as we get in here, we find, Paul is a prisoner but not a prisoner, right? He's a prisoner but not a prisoner. He's being detained, I think, because of what he was doing to try to speak the gospel to people, and they didn't like it. So there's a group of people that didn't like it. And so as we begin chapter 5, we see as Paul is going through this process now, where he's now making his appeals, and we're going to now look at here. This chapter is Paul appeals to Caesar. All right, is what the heading in my Bible tells us. All right, so. Remember last week, Felix got replaced, and we also learned a little bit about Felix, didn't we? We understand he was a pretty ruthless ruler. He was somebody who was looking for what? The money, the little payout here that didn't come, and then. We see that everywhere Paul goes, he continues to have a contingent that follows in behind him and just raises all sorts of trouble. And so now what we find is Paul is in the hands of yet another governor. So what I'd like us to do is let's, I know I said read 25, 1 through 12, but let's start with just the first 5 verses. Let's just go to that first paragraph. So I get somebody to read the first paragraph.
Readings after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They urgently requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me and press charges against the man there, if he has done anything wrong.
Okay, so here with the coming of Festus, Paul is finally getting action on his long, drawn-out case. In verse 1, we've got coming from Rome. Festus landed there at Caesarea, where the governor lived, and remember, he was new to the area. All right. So the first thing he had to do when he got there, what do you do? The first thing you do when you go to a new place, you're going to move to a new place. What's the first thing you do?
Clean house.
What's that?
Clean house.
Clean house? Oh, okay, I was thinking maybe a little before that. one of the first things you do is you kind of get a lay of the land, don't you? You try to figure out what's where and those kinds of things. And this is no different here. He has to get a lay of the land. He has to get to know the people and what's going on there. And so then we see what happened was, while he's doing that, the Jews are just waiting for the opportunity to speak with Festus. Okay? New governor, okay, new person to try to influence, right? And so they're just waiting for their opportunity to speak to him. The best opportunity they would have had probably would have been when they first met, right? First impressions are everything, right? First impressions are everything. So probably that would have been the best time. But I think something very interesting is happening here. You see, if someone were to come and tell you something that you had a really tough time believing, there's a tie at least to my children's message. Would you believe it? Somebody comes to you and tells you something, you go, yeah, right. I don't think so. All right? So probably not. But if a whole group of people come and tell you the same thing, does that give some credence maybe to their claim? Yeah, everybody's really saying the same thing. So it's sort of like, I read it on the internet, so it must be true, right? Okay, not exactly. And so this is what was happening when they were rescinding their claim before Festus. Now, what they're talking about here is the fact that the case has been held over. Okay? Felix is gone, and so as a favor, they asked Festus to have the case, moved to Jerusalem, right? So moving them to Jerusalem. That would have made it a whole lot easier for them to bring in the witnesses than trying to get them all to truck up to Caesarea, right? They didn't demand, when they met the governor, they didn't demand action. They merely let him know that they hoped that he would seriously consider this move to make it easier. So, a trial in the midst of the enemy is definitely in their favor, right? You get everybody, it's the home court advantage, right? That's exactly what's kind of going on here. And so they're counting on Festus not really understanding what all is really going on. And because what's going on in the background? There's a plot underway, isn't there? There's a plot to kill Paul. Now, as Paul makes his way, he would have had a much smaller contingent of people, wouldn't he? Yeah, he just had a group of people that were traveling with him. And so, one of the things as I was reading this, I go, wow, you can really get a feeling for the depth of the hatred that the Jews really have for Paul. And the reason I say that is 2 years have passed here. 2 years they've been really kind of chewing on him, wanting him tried and convicted. Even though there's been changeover in the leadership there in Rome, they still continue to pursue it. All right? They just can't let it go. All right? Just can't let it go. So their desire for Paul's blood, I think, is strong as it has ever been. So the plot is hatched by the 40 who took the vow. Remember the vow? It's now being perpetuated by the Sanhedrin themselves, okay? Those guys had to eat soon, right? The guys who took the vow, remember? They vowed they weren't going to eat until they had Paul's blood, and then Paul got away, and more than 40 days passed. So I'm thinking they probably did eat. So then we get into verses 4 and 5, And we find that the cunning of the Jews has failed, hasn't it? Because what happens is Festus doesn't take sides. He also didn't have any time to review all these facts surrounding the case, which is what the Jews were really counting on. So Paul was going to be safely kept in Caesarea. Now, besides here, Festus tells the Jews he's going back in a few days. All right, so what's he telling them when he says that? I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to you guys. All right, and he's almost telling them it's like a thorn in their side. And now Festus is not asserting Paul's rights or offering an excuse to the Jews. Luke is just merely stating the fact for us. Festus lets them know, yes, I know this case. I don't have time to look at everything surrounding this case. And I'm only going to be here a short while. So I really don't have a whole lot of time. But they can wait, all right, until he can conduct this inquiry, if you will, in a very logical way. Which is something they had not counted on. What they were looking to do with all their masses is they were looking to really kind of snowball Festus into really giving them what it is they wanted, no matter what. And Festus is saying, no, wait a minute. I want to look at the facts. I want to look at the facts. Was it Dragnet that said, hey, give me the facts, man. Just the facts. Yeah. That's what he wants. Just the facts. All right? And so if you look at the Jews now, they really had nothing else they could do. They had to go with the new governor's suggestion, didn't they? He's basically told them, this is what I'm going to do. They're not going to change his mind. They're just going to have to, I guess the best way to say it is they're just going to have to deal with it. Right? Just deal with it. All right? And so we see in verse, we'll go ahead and read now, what do we got? 6 through 12. Let's read 6 through 12. We can do that.
Well, after he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to charge against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus said, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go.
So we see here begins this section here. Festus assumes the judgment seat, okay? He assumes the judgment seat. And so we know that then after 10 days, Festus goes back to Caesarea. He convened the court the next day. He ordered Paul to be brought in. And so the stage is set, all right? Paul is before the court, and his accusers are also now present. So then begin the charges and defense. Okay, everything was delayed until Paul was there. And so again, you've got this courtroom scene, okay? We've got the judge is in his elevated chair. I don't know if any of you know this, but this is the reason why if you go to court, the judge is set up above the rest of the courtroom. All right? It's the same idea. He sits presiding over the trial. And so what happens is first the accusers get to go and they get to present their case against Paul. Now, this time there was no lawyer present. Okay? No lawyer present. Now, we don't know why, but we can, I think, safely assume the reason they didn't bring a lawyer in this time was because the last time it didn't go so well, right? Yeah, poor guy. And what we see is what the Jews are doing is putting forth this very gallant effort to prove this case, against Paul. And we also see, I think, as we read this lesson and what Luke has told us, that they didn't do a good job. Okay, they presented their case, and when the Sanhedrinists completed their case, it was again Paul's opportunity to present his side. Now, just as Luke doesn't really give us charges here, he also really doesn't give us a defense. So Luke tells us that Paul ended his defense with a summation that basically told the court, hey, I am innocent. I did no wrong. I did nothing against the law. I did nothing against the temple. I did nothing against Caesar. So just as the Jews had 2 years, if you remember there, 2 years seething over this case against Paul, Paul had 2 years also to meditate on his defense. All right, so Paul spent all that time figuring out how he was going to present his defense. And so the point that Paul is just driving home is, I've done nothing to offend Caesar, which is a really good thing, I think, to say before a Roman judge, don't you? Most definitely. All right. And he hasn't done anything to violate Jewish laws. Almost putting the question to the judge here. Why would a Roman want to proceed in such a case? It's got nothing to do with you. It's got nothing to do with your law. Why would you even want to take this case up? All right? Now, Festus, he wants to appease the Jews, doesn't he? He wants to appease the Jews. And so Luke gives us a very decisive turn here in the trial. The trial now takes a very new direction. The Jews had no case against Paul. Paul's statement in verse 8 should have led the governor to make his verdict. But we see the same justice we saw in the court of Festus, and we saw in Felix's court, right? Again, there's an undertone here. We see a change in his demeanor, in Festus's demeanor. All right? The Jews maybe didn't prove their case in court, but they let him know that they, the Jews, are a force that he's going to have to reckon with. All right? Remember, safety in numbers? Yeah. Right? That he's a force that they're just going to have to reckon, that he's going to have to reckon with. And so Festus proposes the trial be moved to Jerusalem. Now this statement by Festus must have caused all the leaders of the Jews, it must have caused their ears to really perk up. It's like, wait a minute. He just said what we wanted to see happen. All right? And so maybe they could execute their plot after all. However, as a Roman citizen before a Roman court, the governor could not adjourn his case to another place without Paul's consent. Okay, remember, Paul's not under arrest here. He's being detained. All right? He's not under arrest. And so therefore, there has to be that question out there that says, hey, we want to move this trial to Jerusalem. Paul, what do you think? You think you want to do it? And what is Paul's response there in verses 10 and 11? It's a pretty emphatic what? Denial. It's a pretty emphatic denial. If Festus is unwilling to give Paul justice in Caesarea, where he regularly holds his court, what assurance is Festus giving Paul that he would have justice in Jerusalem? I found out with the with the preschool the other day. I was trying to make a point of 0, and I said, "So what do you think?" And I said, how many? And they go, 3. And I went, 3? And so Pamela was there. She goes, 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay. 0, okay. And so, and because he knows when he goes to Jerusalem, it's going to be a pretty openly hostile environment, right? And so look at how Paul answers there. He says what? He says, I am standing in Caesar's court. He is before the judgment seat of Caesar, where it is necessary that he be judged. His case must be decided by Roman law and not the law of the Jews. Okay, remember, he's making this distinction, separating what they're saying he's doing into how does it impact Roman law and how does it impact Jewish law? And so, do you think Festus really needed to be reminded of that? Probably not, right? So Paul again states he's done nothing wrong. Paul's, the verdict has to be he's either guilty or not guilty, and if anything from his past stands before him worthy of death, as far as he is concerned, Festus needs to know that if I've done anything worthy of death, then it's like, bring it on. Bring it on. He's not trying to back away from punishment for anything he's done wrong, but Paul's words are very emphatic here. What does he say? He says, I appeal to Caesar. All right? Every Roman citizen has a right to make this appeal. Now, it's not like our courts where you can take an appeal after a judgment is made. This appeal was Paul's last legal maneuver. And so he's basically turning from the lack of justice to really the finer points of justice. And so verse 12 gives us the decision. What's the decision? Verse 12.
To Caesar you will go.
Yeah, to Caesar you will go. In other words, so be it, right? So be it. So he's asked to go before Caesar, and the ruling is, hey, you want to go before Caesar? To Caesar you will go. Okay? So let's now read 13 through 22. Unless anybody's got any comments to that. No? Okay, let's read 13 through 22.
A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, there is a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over any man before he has faced his accusers and has had an opportunity to defend himself against their charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters, so I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. When Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. He replied, tomorrow you will hear him.
Okay. So what happens here? Paul puts Festus in a quandary, doesn't he? See, Festus is somewhat taken aback by Paul's response. And so he had to consult with Agrippa. And in doing so, what's happening here, Festus is recognizing, and this has to be really kind of tough to him to do to to his superior here, recognizing that he hasn't really managed this case very well, right? He hasn't really managed it very well. And what's happened here is Paul has basically told him to his face, hasn't he? And so commentators sense a little remorse in Festus, that he knows that he probably should have acquitted Paul instead of offering this inconvenient appeal to Caesar. Now, bless you. Now, the visit he was receiving from Agrippa and Bernice was an occasion for the king to welcome his new governor, since he was, again, remember, the new governor in town. And Bernice, an opportunity for her to talk, and do you see just this tangled web starting to form here? You know, all these people with their fingers in the pie here, all right? Now, Bernice, so we know who Bernice was, all right? She is the eldest daughter of Agrippa I. She had married her uncle, the king of Chaldees, and after his death, basically took up with her brother, Agrippa II, and then later convinced Ptolemy, the king of Cilicia, to marry her to hush the scandal that she was with her brother. Okay, and so that in essence, trying to give this at least perception that she had, that she was not in this incestuous relationship. At any rate, that's the situation when she comes to visit Festus. Now, Festus discussed the case of Paul with Agrippa II during Agrippa's extended stay. Agrippa and Bernice had this extended stay in Caesarea, which afforded them the opportunity for them to have Festus have an audience with Festus here to let him do some explaining. What is it you have done? All right, and I want us to notice kind of the there in verses 14 through 16 that what he does, what Festus does, is a whole lot of backpedaling, right? He's saying, just so you know, I did nothing wrong, but here's what is happening. Okay? So it's like, hey, we do that too, don't we? We push the blame off on somebody else. That's what he's doing. And so now we may wonder, at least I did, you guys may wonder too, but how did Luke get this kind of information that he's presenting here in our lesson today? Luke comes across almost as being like one of those paparazzis, that kind of follow around and, everybody's snapping pictures and things like that, because you think about it, both Agrippa and Festus were very public people, right? And so when they traveled about, they had a lot of people tending to their needs. So they had a lot of, we would call them, I guess, attendants, right? And Luke, remember, did a lot of research of everything that he wrote. And so more than likely, he was doing the same thing here. He's done a lot of research. And who's the best person to talk to about what's going on? Those people that are taking care of the big guys, okay? So he's probably talking with them. And so since he doesn't want to waste the king's time, he looks for his attendants to tell him what he thinks he needs to know. And so it's also clear to us here that he's spending time also talking with Paul. And so Festus is telling Agrippa, he doesn't know what to do with him. He said, I've done nothing wrong. I did everything I was supposed to do. I just have no idea what it is I should be doing with this guy. Okay? Now, Festus makes known the importance of this man Paul in verse 15. What does it say there in verse 15? In verse 15 it says, "And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out a case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him." Okay? He's really telling us that, hey, these people brought this case. They want us to bring a verdict of guilty against him so that he will be killed. Now, Festus doesn't mention something, all right? He doesn't mention that they wanted Paul tried in Jerusalem, but in verse 16, Festus, in his mind, tells Agrippa his answer to the Jews wanting him in Jerusalem for trial. He told him what the Roman law required, all right? And what did the Roman law require? Whose approval did he need to move it to Jerusalem? Paul's, right? And so, incidentally here, Festus states that what he did was he laid down the law to the Jews and he had them come to Caesarea. All right? And so he's taking full credit for there not being any kind of delay in the proceedings against Paul. All right? As hey, bring it on the next day if we can. And so this lets us see a little more of Festus's character. And what do we see him doing? He's constantly trying to cover his tracks. All right? He doesn't want any footprint of him to be visible. And so the viewpoint of the judge then is then revealed. Okay? We get a glimpse into what's going on inside now Festus's mind, and this comes from being the presiding judge. It brought up a lot of things, that he was not expecting. He was expecting something completely different in this trial against Paul. And so we could see that what was coming up was what they wanted was a rubber stamp. The Jews wanted this rubber stamp that Paul would be found guilty, and all they could offer were these issues associated with their own religion. In particular, this guy Jesus, who was dead. But we know what?
He's alive.
He's alive, right? He's alive. All right? It was the same issue that was raised 2 years earlier, right? In regards to the resurrection, it was the same issue that was raised with Felix. So Festus can do nothing but acquiesce to the fact that he was at a loss for what to do. He says, this is not what I'm trained for. I'm trained to deal with the Roman law. I'm not trained to deal with all of this law and whatever that the Jews have. All right? And so he did the only thing he could really do. He asked Paul if he wanted to go to Jerusalem to be tried. And something that just dawned on me. One of the things he says is, do you want to go to Jerusalem to be tried? But he doesn't say by me, does he? He just says, do you want to go to Jerusalem to be tried? And so we got Festus really kind of showing his ignorance and the fact that he really knows nothing about the Jewish religious matters. Okay? So Festus says Paul appealed to Caesar, but neglected to mention that really what he had done there in verse 21 is really forced him to make his appeal. Festus said that Paul, requested to be held over so that he was complying with that. All he was doing was complying with that request. It was his decision as to go or not. He didn't want to go, so it's really kind of his decision. He's only complying with that request. And so maybe it was time for Agrippa to actually try at hearing the case, right? maybe it's time that, hey, the buck stops here, really. Maybe he really needs to hear the case. And so Festus agrees with Agrippa's request to hear Paul. So in fact, he says, bring him in the very next day, right? Now, we don't know whether this was Festus's intent from the beginning or Agrippa's desire to upstage Festus. What do you see a lot of times? You see a lot of these memes on the internet where somebody gets pulled over and they say, I want to talk to your sergeant, or I want to talk to your lieutenant, right? All right. Why are they doing that? Because they think the sergeant or the lieutenant is going to upstate the officer who's pulled them over. But if you watch those very much, what do you see happen? Yeah. Usually the sergeant or the lieutenant sides with the officer, all right? And so that's what we've got here. We think, maybe Agrippa is desiring to upstage Festus, but divine intervention provided yet another opportunity for Paul to be heard. Once again now, Paul's fame and stature in the Christian movement probably preceded him, all right? That people knew Paul. He was a very prominent individual by this time in the whole Christian movement, all right? And so then that brings us to verses 23 through 27. So I get somebody to read that.
The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to His Majesty about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him."
Okay.
It's like legal maneuvering.
Oh, yeah. What is he saying there? He's basically saying, look at me. I am the king. Bring Paul to me. Okay? I think Luke is very masterful here in what he's written. He's setting the stage. It begins with this very impressive entrance of Agrippa and his sister, right? There's great pomp and circumstance. They come in, they're followed by all of these high-ranking officials, and no doubt in that entourage that was following him that Festus was one of them. So we have this picture in our minds. Again, maybe this is just me, I'm very visual, but I got this visual of them kind of coming into the court, all adorned in their ceremonial garb. So people will take notice of who's important and who's not. Okay? Now, a lot of times, the important one comes first, right? Followed by his entourage. And the world, is kind of indicating, I am the one who's got the world at my fingertips. And Agrippa issues this command, have Paul brought in. Okay, this is another one of those pictures you've got to kind of get in your mind. All this pomp and circumstances is through all of this, and Paul is brought before them. Now, some commentators saying that this was such a show because they thought Paul was wealthy. Why would they think Paul was wealthy? Do you remember? What did they bring to Jerusalem? Money. They brought the offering, right? This is still going on in their guys' minds. Hey, they brought all of this offering to Jerusalem. This guy has power. This guy has money. Okay? And something I want us to note here, when it says, have Paul brought in, is Paul brought in chains? No. He's not brought in chains. Right? Why? Why is he not brought in chains? He's never been accused. He's never been tried. He's not guilty of anything. He is just detained, right? Just detained. And so Festus carefully opens the proceedings with carefully chosen words. And the address is simple, but yet it's pretty direct. The king is named as the first person of utmost importance. Remember, I told you a lot of times when you read the Greek, what they do is when they start naming people, they put the most important ones they're trying to emphasize, they put them first. And so the king is named as the first person. He's the person of utmost importance. And we take notice of something, though, whose name is not mentioned. Paul's. Paul's name is not mentioned. He is, in quotes, this person. You know, again, with our visual eyes, you can all see everybody focusing on the king and the king coming in and all the pomp and circumstances, and then all eyes are going to shift. And who are they going to be looking at? Paul, right? As Paul is brought in before them. Okay, so here you can probably assume. I know that's not a good thing, but you can probably assume how the whole Jewish community is in this uproar over wanting him killed. But this man is innocent, by my thought. Right? Festus is up front and honest concerning his point of view. And for that, I think we really have to give Festus some credit here. But this opens the question is why, if he felt the way he did, why did he not at that time acquit Paul? Why does Paul have to petition Caesar? Now,
It had something to do with Paul demanding to see Caesar.
Well, yeah, go back.
Right then and there, but Paul demanded to see Caesar. And once he made that demand, Festus' hands were tied.
Yeah, if you go back to verse 21, when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Right, exactly. All right. And remember, they wanted Paul in Jerusalem. So Festus doesn't mention this in his address, does he? He gets to the heart of the matter. They want Paul put to death, as and Paul, as was his right, made the appeal to Caesar. All right? So what can the governor send in advance to the emperor? What can the governor send in advance to the emperor? The letter. Okay? So now we got the difficulty. All right? Festus doesn't know how to broach what's going on with the emperor with Paul's case. To get at what he lacks is really kind of the knowledge of where they are at this point in time. And so Agrippa's been assigned this task that he could not accomplish. So, and I think it gets even worse. Festus knew of the Jewish accusations, and they were a matter of dispute about faith versus Roman law. And this was made very clear when Festus wanted Paul sent to Jerusalem. So, if he wrote about this whole truth of what it is they actually knew, he would have to tell them that this dispute is really about these Jewish accusations. It wasn't about Roman law. And so, this creates a dilemma for him, doesn't it? He doesn't know what to put in this letter to let the emperor know what is going on. And it is unreasonable to send a prisoner to the emperor without any charges against him. And so Festus knows that sending a prisoner to the emperor without charges is not going to go well for him. I mean, I don't know. I remember in the secular world, if I took something before my boss and I had no idea what I was talking about, it would not go well for me. Okay? Same thing here. He's got nothing to tell him. And if he, it's not going to bode well for him if he's got no charges for the prisoner. And so he'd in essence be telling the emperor, he says, I have to admit to you, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do my job. I don't want to come clean and say, hey, this is not a matter of Roman law. And so now the stage is set. The stage is set for a trial. Okay? And so, the takeaway, we look at the legal system, we look at that as really a secular institution. And I've said in there that even we Lutherans, we exercise our rights within the confines that the government has placed on us. Okay? There's a way everything works, and if it doesn't work that way, then it doesn't go well for us. And so, and for Paul, it's no different. And so I'll let you guys read the takeaway. How am I doing on time? I can start chapter 26. I can at least get through my introduction. Any comments on chapter 25? It's a saga. We know the story, don't we? But we find that, as with every story, we remember usually just high points. A lot of times with the story, we're not getting into the weeds and understanding what's going on all around the story. So here we've got a lot of people trying to save face here in chapter 25. And so I'll tell you what, I'll go through my introduction and I'll save the handout for next week. Okay? So we'll do that. As we move to chapter 26. Now, the heading in my Bible says Paul's defense against Agrippa. We're talking Agrippa II. And so I asked a small group question, and we don't have to spend time on it, but, it's one of those things. What's the most memorable stories you've had the opportunity to tell during family time that you spent with your family? Okay? Now, I can tell you, as a parent, especially when the kids are grown and they all get together for, like Thanksgiving or something like that, all of a sudden, all these stories come out and you're like, what? You did what? All these stories come out. And, some of them you sort of wonder, the question is, you wonder, why am I alive? Some of the things I've done in my past, why am I still alive? Why did God let me live? Okay? And so I want you to sort of keep that in mind as we talk about Paul's defense before Agrippa II. Now, remember how chapter 25 ended? Festus is looking for this judicial probe by Agrippa, and what this was actually supposed to look like, Luke doesn't tell us. Be interesting to know what his probing would look like. We also don't know what type of information that Festus was going to be able to glean from this so he could write this letter to Caesar. And so what do we find with Paul? Paul has been open, right? He's been open and honest with all of this information. He was always willing to speak when given a chance. He's even said, if you found something in me worthy of death, I mean, I'm not afraid of that. That's what it comes to. If you remember, there's another place where there was a judicial examination. Anybody remember where that was? Because it wasn't too long ago we had it. Good Friday. We have Jesus standing before Pilate. We had the examination, right? And then what does he say? He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered him, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you're a king?" And Jesus answered him, "You say I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." All right? So we had Jesus went through this judicial examination. Now, Agrippa doesn't go that route, because Agrippa has really actually heard all about the case. And he got it secondhand, not necessarily from the accusers. And so he's really in no position to be able to do a judicial examination, especially in front of the audience he's got now. Besides, Festus should have done all of this already, and so in Agrippa's mind, he should not have to be redoing it. And so as Paul appears before Festus, we have to remember he wasn't on trial, and we remember why, because there was that differentiation between Roman law and Jewish law. And we also know that it was because Paul appealed to Caesar. So all the proceedings basically should have stopped at that time, waiting for this to happen. So the motion for a change of venue was made to whom? It was made to Festus, right? And what did Festus do? He authorized the movement of the trial to the emperor's court. So Festus is the one who drove Paul to make the appeal. And because he made that appeal, he had to follow through with it. And so what could Agrippa do when Festus turned Paul over to him? Okay? Well, that's how this chapter opens. It opens with Agrippa hearing what Paul actually has to say. All right? So the title in mine is Paul's Defense Before Agrippa. And that's where we'll pick up with chapter 26 next week. We're almost out. We're almost done. Okay, we've got just a few more chapters to go. And remember, following this, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. Okay. We're not going to go through Revelation, so don't everybody get their hopes up. I'm not going to be here that long. But I do want to go through the 7 letters to the 7 churches. I think that's going to be actually kind of fun as we understand that. So, any other thoughts before we close? You guys all need more coffee or what? All right. Let's go ahead and rise. Let's close with the Lord. Shall we pray? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, blessings. Enjoy a time of fellowship before worship.